ever. We don't really know what we're doing here. I posted the join link everywhere, so we're probably gonna get like a million people. But here's what I'm gonna talk about first, and I'm gonna ask the people who are here about it. Do you guys think that the use of nuclear weaponry in warfare is ever justified? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Steve, what do you think?
Well, it's only been done once, actually, and I think it was justified in that particular case.
Okay, cool. What do you think, Agata?
Well, if we're talking about the case with Japan, I don't think it was justified at all. I mean, they're on the verge of surrender already. What we could have done is just nuked a non-populated area and maybe showed them what the weapons capability was, and then I think that at that point they probably would have surrendered very quickly.
Okay, I disagree. But no, you finish.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like at the time there was actually a large portion of the U.S. that really wanted the entire island of Japan nuked. I mean, I think that the percentage that they give is like 19% of the U.S. thought that we did not nuke enough of Japan. And I think that at the end of the day, it's pretty unhealthy for a democracy like ours to think like that. I don't think it's healthy for people to think that this was all justified and that we really should have annihilated the entire country. I think it had a bad effect on our nation as a whole. On the other hand, I think that it did show what nuclear weapons were capable of, and that did provide later credence to deterrence theory. So there's that side of this too.
Okay, my perspective is I don't know if I would say that they were on the verge of surrender. They were at the verge of asking for a ceasefire, but I feel like unless they were ready to surrender according to the terms of the Potsdam Declaration, which includes abandoning their imperialist interests, dropping the navy, all the stuff they eventually did, I feel like that's not really good enough because then they're still able to persecute people in China, mainland Asia, etc. And the reason why I don't think they would have surrendered in the sense you described is because I mean, we were invading from the south, obviously, and we just nuked a major city. And Russia was starting to flirt with their territory up from the north. And even then, they didn't surrender. It was 2 days between the first and the second bomb, and they didn't surrender. And then we dropped another bomb, and in response to that, the emperor finally surrendered. But the military was so opposed that they tried to kill the emperor and take over and revoke the surrender. Like, their emperor line is so long, and a lot of people worshipped it. And the fact that they were willing at that point in time to attempt a coup d'etat says the level of determination of some of the military. And I'm not convinced. I think that if we had not scared enough of their military and citizens away, that coup d'etat might have been successful, and then things would have been way worse. It's certainly better than a ground war. I'm not convinced they would have surrendered. I don't think they wanted to fight us anymore, but I'm not convinced that they were on the edge of a ceasefire or of a true surrender to the United States. And I think we needed that. So that's how I feel about it.
Well, if that's true, I mean, when we think about, we already firebombed so many of their civilian areas that I don't think it was just the demonstration that the nuke could kill a lot of civilians, because the firebombs killed more. I mean, the firebombs absolutely killed more civilians than the nuclear weapons did. But I think all we needed to do was demonstrate the power of the nuclear weapons and make it maybe on the outskirts of a city so everybody could see, but we didn't need to kill that many civilians to prove our point.
If we demonstrated the power well enough to convince the emperor, but not well enough to scare most of the military and citizenry into surrender as well, which I believe happened as the result of the bombs, then what would have happened is there would have been a coup d'etat, and then it would have been led by insane military leaders, which would have been way worse. I guess I kind of feel like the best possible outcome that could have happened, happened. And I don't think there's enough evidence to say that a better outcome or the same outcome would have happened if we hadn't nuked Japan. Does it make sense?
Well, if they if they did coup d'état the emperor, how would they justify that the emperor was a god to begin with? I mean, they would lose all of their backing. They'd lose all of their backing, and they wouldn't be able to have their whole justification for being so steadfast in their resolve. And
so, a military dictatorship going in a civil war against part of the military and the citizenry while America is invading and Russia is invading would have been way worse than two nukes. Way, way worse.
But
And
my
I'm not
point
going
is
to
that the nukes themselves aren't necessarily the problem. I mean, the problem was that our country was doing that. That had an effect on our country too. I mean, it wasn't just the
Okay.
civilians that were killed. It had an effect on our country that sort of put in the American mindset that it's okay to nuke people. I mean, this was a good outcome. That's a bad thing for a democracy to think.
Yeah, I can see that point. That does kind of stink. And like I agree with you that it kind of wears on like the ethical nature of a people to engage in that kind of behavior. But I
Exactly.
also, yeah, I do get that. But I
Yeah,
also think like, yeah, what were you gonna say, Steve?
yeah. Except I'm not really sure. I'm convinced that that actually was the outcome. I think in reality, I think it actually turned a lot of people against nuclear weapons. I think in the end, because of what we saw happen in Japan, in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, I think a lot of people said, "Wow, this is way too powerful, way too destructive to keep using. We should keep this under control." So I think that was more the outcome. Now, as I guess from a military perspective, we did build a lot more nuclear weapons after that, but we never used them in warfare. So I kind of think it almost had the opposite effect. I think it turned us against the use of nuclear weapons as an absolute last resort.
I'll have to think about that for a second. My thought is that we actually did come very close to using nuclear weapons several times. I mean, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was the Korean War with MacArthur, I believe. He was very close to just nuking Korea. So I mean, I think that for certain citizens it did turn them against it, and certain other citizens thought, "Oh, hey, this is this great weapon that the United States has." So I mean, it's very fortunate that we didn't actually use nuclear weapons after that. In some way, it did demonstrate their power to people, and I could see that. But at the same time, I mean, we did kill a lot of civilians, and that's still a
Wow.
stain against our country's history.
Yeah,
It
I think,
seems to me that all of the outcomes that we know happened as a result of the nuke. Like you guys said, what listening to you here has led me to believe that the cultural impact was kind of topsy turvy, and we need to sit down and do a lot of study before we can claim anything positive or negative. I do kind of feel what Kagata is saying in terms of the fact that it was good that people saw what it could do and that they heard the horror stories that came after it. But it also probably wasn't super good for the American people. I kind of feel that. But in the discussion of whether or not it took down Japan in the best possible like quick way, made them put them in a position where they could recover quickly, which they did, and become a world economic power, which they did. I think it's really tough to argue that there's another path that would have given us the same kind of certainty and that kind of outcome. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, never mind. All right. BS Bala is too busy to join us. And by too busy, I mean he doesn't have a mic.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, it's too bad. So, Steve Throckmorton, do you think evolution happened?
I don't. Do I think evolution happened? I don't think there's enough evidence to support macroevolution. And what I mean by that is moving from one species to the other. And I know the story. I know the story always is, well, macroevolution is nothing more than just microevolution over a long period of time. But I don't believe the fossil record actually shows evidence for that. What we actually see is long period of stasis, which virtually no change for millions of years, and then we see short periods of punctuated evolution, or whatever you want to call it. But like the Cambrian explosion, for example, and there's actually several of those periods that occurred. All of a sudden, I mean, in a geologic blink of an eye, you see thousands, millions of new species appear. So it doesn't actually happen in the way that Darwin predicted that it would happen.
So, what do you think
So
is the difference between micro and macroevolution?
I think microevolution. I would define microevolution as change within a species that allows it to survive. I mean, the classic study of the finches by Darwin, for example. You know, their beaks grew longer during periods. I think was it periods of drought. I forget the exact details of it, but I think animals have built within them the ability to change and adapt. But those are characteristics that are already built in. They're dormant characteristics that come out when the environment changes. And then when the environment changes back, they go back to their original configuration again. So it's usually not a permanent change. It's a response to an environmental situation, but then they go back to a norm again from then. It's not a continual change that keeps moving.
Rob. Okay, good. Sorry. He's good at making conversation go, and I, as you can see, am not. I'm just good at responding to people. So I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Steve. I was just excited that we.
I was pretty well finished.
Okay, cool. How would you know when something had evolved to the point that it was no longer the same species? And once you answer that question, we're going to transition. I'm just curious.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, you don't have to answer though.
Yeah, it's you know what? It's very difficult. That's another that's another issue really. Is that how do you define a species? Species are really man-made categories. We decide what a species is and what's not. Like a horse and a mule and a donkey, you know, are they actually different species or are they variations within the same species? I mean, it's a fuzzy question in a way, or it's a fuzzy issue to resolve.
Cool. Hey, Rob. Rob, do you think the nuking of Japan?
Sorry, you sort of broke up there. Could you repeat that question?
I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Just 1 second.
Yeah, I can hear you very faintly. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Got to get used to which speaker to use. Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
I was just asking you what you think about the nuking of Japan because you talked about that earlier.
Oh, the nuking of Japan. So you're talking about Hiroshima or?
Yeah, and Nagasaki. That's correct.
Okay, well, it's early days for me in that research. So you know my background, I think a little. What I did is I went back and looked at the religious story from Cyrus the Great and followed it through to Constantine the Great, and that's given me a great insight into how religions have been corrupted by empires. So my basic premise is, and I'm starting now to look at 325 AD forward through time, and what I'm starting to see is that the empire continued beyond beyond Constantine, and also there's a Pharisee element which turns into Ashkenazi Jews. Now that's not a criticism of Jewish people. It's really this more like an elite sort of group.
What turned into Ashkenazi Jews?
Sorry?
What turned into? What turned
think,
into them? You said something turned into them. I'm wondering what you meant.
Sorry, the Pharisee thing, and that tracks back to Cyrus the Great. But anyway, pushing that aside, just bringing back to your question, I have a very strong feeling, and the evidence seems to be pointing towards some very strong influences in the American scene that seem to track back to these empire roots, and they're quite bloodthirsty behaviours we see. And if I go back to 1900s when, who was it, one of the big banking mobs bought out Carnegie Steel.
Rothschilds?
Who?
Are you talking about Rothschild?
Well, it was J.P. Morgan, actually. He bought out Carnegie Steel, and that was a really interesting and telling point in time. It's about the 1900s, and then if we move forward to the 1930s, the whole economic paradigm in America really changed, because you had that event where the bankers got together and created monetary policy out of the reserve banking system. And I know that's all conspiracy theory stuff, but I don't know. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that that was a divide and conquer strategy that put the money in the wrong hands. And anyway, moving forward in time, we see some rather interesting behaviours. Particularly, a guy called Kissinger seems to have done or been involved in some very shady deals.
What did these things have to do with the nuking of Japan? Sorry, not to.
Well, what I'm trying to do is build a context that says that, look, American governance and their involvement in wars may have an underlying story that hasn't been fully flushed out.
Okay.
And so where I'm taking that is that leaves a mindset in play that's willing to actually kill a lot of people with a flick of a switch.
But isn't it true that America was more or less isolationist prior to World War I? And even going into World War II, we were pretty hesitant to engage. Is it true that there was a big base of warlike mindsetedness going into World Wars I and II that built on itself and allowed us to eventually nuke? I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, well, the way I'd read it, now you've got to remember I'm early days on this because I just finished that mammoth work on the religious stuff to work that out. But it's early days for me. But what I'm starting to see is that, well, we'll see. If you go back to Russia and, the conflict between China and Japan, and you have a bit of a look at that, you find that there was some financing coming in from the state side. There was a banker called Schiff, I think his name was, and he largely funded the industrialization of Japan. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why the hell would he bother doing that?
Money?
Sorry?
I mean, money. I mean,
oh, yeah, absolutely. But then if you tie that back into the fact that J.P. Morgan now owns Carnegie Steel, well, wow, isn't that a boon for that industry? You know, if we can get a war going. So you have this conflict between China and Japan that kicked off, and I think that was, I have a suspicion, but I can't say definitely because I haven't done enough research. But I have a strong suspicion when I look at the broader picture that was very much a manipulated trigger to an early conflict between Japan and China. And then you start to see the Russian invasion down into China, and we see some very brutal behaviours towards the Chinese. So it seems that the Chinese at that particular time were a bit behind the pack in terms of industrialisation, and they seemed like a...
Then are you talking about World War II right now?
No, I'm back in about late 1800s, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I always try and examine the broader picture. I think what I found from my religious research was one of the biggest problems in cracking that nut was to actually, you find people will be too isolated in the debate and focused on a small error. It's only when you look at that 900-year period you start to see emerging patterns of behaviour that say, whoa, hang on, these things are repeating.
Oh, look, is that Scott from the Illuminati group?
Hello?
Hello?
I'm just waiting for Scott to acknowledge you, mate.
No, I'm sorry, I just wanted to hear. Scott, are you from the Illuminati group, or who are you?
I'm not. I'm from the Debate Faith group.
Oh, cool. Well, welcome, man. All right, so let's kind of segue into a more interesting conversation. What is everyone's religious views here, by the way? I'm just curious. I'm a Christian.
You are?
I'm also a Christian as well.
What about you?
I'm a person that, and I base this on my research. I don't like to use the word belief. I think belief's a curse on humanity. I use the term no. I know that Jesus was a real character, and I subscribe to what are commonly known as the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. However, I qualify that by saying that the term Gnostic has been confounded in history and it's not properly known. The Jesus that I read talks about a knowing tradition, and it's a very solid philosophy. So that's me.
Okay, cool. What about you, Scott?
Sorry, atheist.
Ew. So is Kagata.
Yeah.
He's still a human being.
Kagata, do you have anything to say about your perspective as well?
I'm an atheist absurdist, or in the Camus school of thought. But that's about it.
What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it means that I don't really believe that you can have really strong views that on religion. I don't think that's a knowledge that humanity can really attain. I think that humanity is kind of limited in the amount of knowledge they can really have on these subjects. So even though I'm an atheist, that's because I personally don't believe in it, but I don't necessarily think that another person's beliefs can be valid. I don't think my beliefs can be valid. I think that that we just kind of put our faith into these things.
So there's kind of an absurdity for any human to claim knowledge or believe about anything on the subject because the amount of information we can process about the universe is so infinitely small.
Exactly.
Okay, that's cool.
I disagree
Scott,
with that.
Yeah, you agree or disagree?
No, I disagree. I disagree.
Oh, yeah? Why?
Okay, so, and again, my source will be Jesus from the Gnostic texts. He very clearly says in those texts that seek until you find, and then he goes on to say, know and know thyself. So probably the easiest way I can relate that to you, and unfortunately I suppose we can't flick to a video, but there's a great video online about a baboon troop. Max, you might remember me mentioning this. But I think it clearly demonstrates that some of the behaviours of good that we associate with good and evil in human society, we can see them in this baboon troop. And what happened to that baboon troop is that they had a dramatic event occur which changed them from their normal hierarchical paradigm model, which really services the king baboon, and they turned into more of a herd behaviour. And I think that clearly demonstrates what good and evil, what the foundation of good and evil is, and that to me is goodness comes from being a herd member, but belonging to the family and looking after a survival strategy that relates to
Kind of
preserving.
like how the Germans herded in the 1940s.
Oh no! This is done by choice. You've got to choose.
How can you? Oh, a lot of the Germans were supporting Hitler by choice. How can you say that if herd mentality is your sole standard for what constitutes right and wrong, then how can you that by that standard the Germans weren't wrong? They weren't even wrong when they killed people because they believed that was beneficial for the herd. It was certainly if the herd believed it was beneficial to the herd, and if those differences were causing problems within the herd, it seems difficult to say that that was wrong unless you have another standard for what constitutes ethics.
All right. So we're talking about me presenting the herd model as the selfless good sort of side of the duality argument, but the other side, Max, is a hierarchical model, and I'd say to you that the Hitler model is more the hierarchical model. So you've got Hitler at the top of the tree. He's controlling the herd, and he's doing things that are in his paradigm, or that pyramid paradigm's interest. And we see that in the animal kingdom, and that's the way a traditional baboon troop, the way they behave. The old king, he's the top of the heap. He wakes up in the morning and he'll find his subordinates. He'll give them a smack around a bit, and then they'll run around and terrorise down the troop, and that's the way he keeps his structure in order. So it's very much the hierarchical model. What I argue, and
isn't that better for the herd though? Isn't that better for the herd if he actually does keep structure in order, if he's successful?
Yeah, but it's quite a violent little society. So what you get
is something wrong with violence if it's better for the herd?
Yeah, well, I think so, because it's not necessary. What happened in this particular study, and it's online. Are we posting this? Is this video going to end up on YouTube?
I think it's on YouTube right now, but
okay. I was just going to put the link to that video so guys can have a look at it.
I'll make sure it goes in the about section.
Okay, I'll try and work that out. But anyway, fundamentally, I Oh, sorry, you'll have to rephrase your question because I sort of lost track a bit.
Oh, I was asking you. Your first standard for what constituted ethics centered around a herd mentality. Actually, Kagata, do you have anything to say to all this?
Not really. Keep going on. I want to see where this leads.
Okay, Steve, do you have anything you want to say about this?
Can I ask you a question? The gentleman who said, what was the gentleman's name who said that he was an atheist absurdist?
That was
me.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
That's
his
me.
name, I call him Kagata.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a question, and I'm not being facetious. It's a serious question. Based on what you said, are you basically saying you don't believe you can know whether God exists or not, but you personally have decided, like kind of a sort of an act of faith, that there is no God? Is that
exactly? Yeah, I think
Okay.
that we all have acts of faith that we take this leap of faith that that our ideas on our own intuitions are right, but so I might very well have taken the same leap of faith that Jesus exists. I mean, it's very easy to see how that could be fine too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, got you. Thank you. That's what I thought. I was just getting clarification.
of course.
Okay, well, no, that's probably a good lead-in for me. I'll come back to this saying, and Max, I know I say it 100 times, but I will say it again. Sorry. This is the Cherokee wisdom, which I sort of tie into that that baboon story. So bear with me one sec. I'll just read it to you guys. And this is where I say that this good and evil is very knowable. And so the Cherokee story goes like this. An old Cherokee told his grandson there is a battle between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, inferiority, lies, and ego. The other is good. It is about joy, love, peace, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth. The boy thought about what his grandfather had just said, and he said, "Grandfather, which wolf wins this battle?" And the old man quietly replied, "The one you feed." Now, when I reflect on that particular wisdom, I think, well, hey, that's actually right. I understand that. I can relate to that. I know that in myself, sometimes I can be a selfish arsehole, and that doesn't seem to pan out too well for me, and it's usually about serving my own needs. I'm less that way nowadays. I drift more to making that choice, and that's a conscious choice that I make to actually be more selfless and more about the herd and about the other person than myself. And I find that when I actually take those choices and put my own selfish things aside, things seem to work out better for me. You know, I get a bit better outcomes. Now, I can't do both things at once. I can't. It's impossible for me. What happens is... Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were done. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
I was just going to say that's actually a biblical view. What you just stated is actually a biblical view of humanity, in that mankind was created good, had a knowledge of good, but then chose to rebel against God, and sin entered into the picture. So mankind has both of them. We all have both of those things.
And I agree with that. So, and like, I don't say that the Bible or even the Quran are short on wisdom. They certainly do carry wisdom. What I'd say to you about the Bible, and this is based on my research, is that what you had in the original Jewish faith, and I think that comes from the Canaanites, and there's some evidence that says that the Exodus story cannot be proven. I mean, if you look at archaeological claims and Egyptologists, for about I think it's about the last 100 years, they say that the Exodus story has no evidence. But the Canaanites is a different story. Now, I kind of think that the Jewish religion is full of all sorts of wonderful religions, but the problem happened when it hit Persia and Cyrus the Great. Things went a little belly up, and it shifted towards that empire model, and it changed the whole structure of the faith. So don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm not pushing away the Bible completely, but I'm saying that there's some definite corruption in it. What I am saying, though, is that this good and evil concept that flows, this duality that flows through all of spirituality, That is knowable, and that's the point I'm trying to bring to this discussion now, that these things we can clearly know, and in doing so we then know ourselves. And when we know ourselves, we're then in a position to take better control of ourselves and have a better and more fuller, richer understanding of other people and their motives. Yeah. So that's where I'm...
God works out. What's up, man? Welcome. Are you sober this time? The only time I've ever seen this guy in a YouTube channel, he was like hammered, and it was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So, sorry. So, hey, by the way, Rob, you should check my debate group out. I posted a screenshot. In any case, here's kind of a good question. I'm sure one's going to come to mind by the time I finish this sentence. Which religion does the... Okay, you know what? New question. Do you think that... Let's talk again about why it is you think that all the Gospels were written by the same guy. That's always an interesting discussion.
Is this me now, Max?
I guess so.
Okay. So...
I don't think they were by the same.
Huh? No, I don't think so either. I think that's ridiculous.
Someone say it.
Whoa, what the heck? Alright, go ahead and talk.
You ready? Shall I go? Okay, so Max, the reason I think that they were written, well, not written by one guy, I've got to be clear about that, but they were certainly architected by one individual, and that individual was Emperor Nerva. And he did this on the back of the what we're told was a Jewish revolt. I think it was more a Roman persecution, where Rome went down and they wiped out the Essene community. So my premise is that Jesus is an Essene Jew. He's not a Christian at all. And one argument I'll put to you guys to think about is this. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here again. You talk a lot in praise of kind of the Gnostic perspective, the Gnostic Gospels. You talk about the Gospel of Thomas a lot. And then you also say Jesus was an Essene Jew. You seem to be very fond of those people. Again, does it bother you that the Essene Jews followed the Old Testament law, and the Gnostics thought that that was from an evil demiurge that Jesus came to stop? Do you see a contradiction? How can Jesus both be the subject of a Gnostic gospel and be an Essene Jew? Those things contradict each other.
Yeah, I can understand why you take that view, and this sort of lends towards this. See, one of the texts that I really struggled with for a long time was a text called the Apocrypha of John. So that came to earth when they discovered the Gospel of Thomas in 1945 AD as part of the Nag Hammadi library. And that troubled me for a long time, because that was a text that really spoke about, what was the term used, demurge or whatever it is. But fundamentally, this was allegedly a text that was put together by John, the Apostle John Zebedee, and it was put together after he'd been harassed by a Pharisee. John had gone out into the desert, and then he came back and he had a reflection, and he was telling this story. And it really had a weird sort of a context to it that I'd never come across before. But one thing that stood out in that text, John refers to the book of Zoroaster in this text, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I've not read much about Zoroastrianism. I'll go and have a look at that. And that's the thing, that was the actual trigger point that took me back to Cyrus the Great, to find the roots of Zoroastrianism and where this was connected. What I also found was that an interesting thing that I noticed in the Bible, because I then started to really dig quite deeply, I found that in the Bible, the word father was always used in a parental context right up to the book of Isaiah, but at the point of the book of Isaiah, it turned into the father being more of a godly leader figure. And the other thing that I found that was interesting was we see the emergence of the term Holy Spirit at that point in time.
Hey, can I change the subject real fast?
Interesting. One second, Max. Interestingly, both those two terms are found in Zoroastrianism. Yes, sorry, Max, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I feel like we've been kind of on the subject for a while. We've got a whole lot of new people. And I wanted to go around and talk about this subject. Is religion a force for good in the world overall, or a force for bad, or do we know? That's a good question.
What do you
think? I'm gonna go around the circle in order of the ones that I see. Lucas, what do you think?
Give me 1 second. I'm switching over connections. Give me 1 second.
You do your thing. You look like that guy from The Incredibles, though.
Thank you. But yeah, please come back to me. I do have something to say on it. I just need to.
Perfect. Scott, what do you think? Okay, Scott.
I'm having tablet issues. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my camera, my microphone, and all kinds of fun here.
Okay. What do you think, Steve?
I think overall it's a force for good, and the reason I say that is because religion provides a framework of morals and ethics for people to follow that's consistent. And a lot of the religions have better frameworks, and I just think that helps keep people because of the thing that was mentioned earlier about this dual nature that we have of good and evil being within all of us. I think it helps us keep on the straight and narrow road, so to speak.
Lucas, do you agree with what Steve said? And you guys keep debating. I'm going to run to the bathroom real fast.
So you think religion is necessary in a context in which it would encourage us to follow a straight and narrow road, to use your own lingo?
Right. It gives us a... Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, how is that different from a secular empathy? Just the very fact, like, hey, I wouldn't want somebody fucking doing that to me, so I'm not going to do it to them, just because of the fact that I wouldn't want it done to me.
Why didn't that work in Nazi Germany?
Well, you give anybody too much power, and shit happens.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Have you seen the debate with was it Hitchens and Fry about is the Catholic Church a force for good?
I don't know if I've seen that exact one. I've watched a lot of debates.
You should definitely watch that one. I think the motion was that the Catholic Church is a force for good. And basically, I think it was the numbers were like a lot of Christians were there to begin with, and they thought that the Catholic Church was a force for good. By the end of the debate, they thought that it wasn't. So basically kind of referencing off that debate, I would say that religion is not a force for good.
Yep, I agree.
It has good intentions, I think. I think it has good intentions, but it tends to lead people astray and make them more susceptible to evil acts, I think.
How so?
Well, there's a great quote that actually goes on what he's saying. I forget who exactly wrote it. I think it might have been John Steinbeck or somebody. I don't know. But he said, the best laid plans of mice and men often run awry. That's exactly it. Best laid plans only mean so far as the plan works on paper.
How does it lead people astray, though? That's the part I'd like to hear explained.
Well, I really think you should watch that debate because they provide a lot of examples, such as the whole condoms versus HIV in Africa and things like that.
I'm quite happy to offer an explanation.
Let me offer a suggestion of how it leads people astray. Westboro Baptist Church.
But are they bigoted because they're religious, or are they just bigoted and using religion?
That is such a narrow exception, though. That is
biblical interpretation.
According to I've read something from like his children or something. Apparently, like the church was started by a guy who was like abusive, and this is kind of like his outlet.
He was abused as a child himself.
Yeah,
I feel nevertheless,
that is such an exception. That's one church out of literally tens of thousands.
One church? Ku Klux
Klan. But it's not confined to him. It's literally everywhere, all over the world.
What do you think, Lucas?
I mean, look at one of the big things that Fred Phillips stood against and the Westboro Baptist Church was strongly against. Homosexuals, all right? Let's just take that topic alone. Churches all over the place, everywhere, go to gay pride rallies, places where these people are supposed to feel safe, and purposely put themselves there to yell at these people and tell them that they are no good, that they're trash, that they're a burden on society, all this other bullshit based off a Bible. And that's what they do. They hold up a Bible and go, in this book it says you are trash.
I don't personally know anybody that does that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think that, again, that's a rare exception.
Here's what I think. I think humans have certain instincts. I think they have instincts towards these tribalism divisions to say what my people are better than your people. I think that's instinct. I think we can all see what kind of evolutionary motive could give a rise to that instinct. I also think we have an instinct towards kind of greed. And I think that most, if not all, evils that you could point to that were done by a religious group are ultimately rooted in those other human instincts. And I don't think those things are caused by religion. I think they would happen without religion. I think religion provides a convenient excuse, but most of the people who have stood against those things in history have also been religious.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%, Max. It's religion is an excuse to behave badly in those cases. If in reality, somebody who does the kind of things that Westboro Baptist Church does, or goes to gay pride rallies and demeans people, that is not taught in the Bible.
Is it okay to have a book that condones that kind of behavior? The Bible condones slavery. The Bible condones slavery. It condones owning slaves. In fact, it includes a specific rule set on how to buy and sell slaves.
That's not condoning. That's setting it. No, that's seeing the reality of it. The Bible sees the reality of it and sets up guidelines to protect slaves. That's not.
So beating somebody so long as they don't die in 2 days.
You guys, one time. Lucas, you go ahead and say what you're going to say, and then Steve can go. And Kagata, I want to get him too. So let's do.
Yeah. Well, so you're saying that it doesn't set out these rules for slavery. It protects slaves. So beating somebody 2 days or as long as they don't die within 2 days of you beating them, regardless of whether or not they die after from the beatings, that's okay in your mind. I could go out and do that to anybody else. I could just buy them off the street, beat them as long as they don't die 2 days afterwards, and we're cool. That's a-okay in your mind, in your book.
No, it's not. In a culture where slaves are nothing but chattel, and you can run a sort through them at your will as the owner.
I can't treat a cow that way today.
The Bible sets up standards to limit that type of behavior.
Hey, Kagata, what do you think of all this? Kagata?
I think he's muted.
Hey, Max, I've got something I'd like to say on this.
Okay, Rob, what do you want to say?
Okay, well, I think this is important in terms of even the discussion that we're going to enter into. And I find this to be a problem in all these types of religious discussions. So I'm going to tie all that together and try and present it philosophically to you guys. What I've witnessed, and I'm very much against what I'm calling the Mohammedan movement at the moment, and I get very actively involved with Islam people because I think that they're being wound up to cause a bit of trouble at the moment. But I want to talk about what happens in those debates. And it's a very common theme. It happens quite often, and I'm going to suggest we'll experience it here today, and it'll come from you guys, and it'll be part of your behaviours. I'm going to explain to you why I think it happens. What happens is this: when a person, where I come from, and I'm speaking about this duality again, we have what I seem to witness is that we have this mental notion of our reality, and I call that a belief. It may be true, it may not, but if it were true, it's no longer a belief. It starts to move to the knowledge side. And then we have a reality that's experiential. You know, it's something that we can touch and feel and demonstrate. When we have a belief, that belief belongs to the ego. Now, the ego belongs to the evil wolf. What happens, and what I'm starting to observe in these discussions, is that there seems to be it's almost like an automatic defense mechanism. And what you start to see is when you threaten a person's belief, their tone and their behavior starts to rise up. They get more anxious, the voice raises, and they get very dogmatic in defense of that belief. So, and how does that happen? Well, I think it works like this. It's a very primitive instinct, and which goes back to your point, Max. What I think happens is that the ego mind or the ego belief sees a threat coming its way, and as soon as it recognizes that threat, it adopts a fight or flight response mechanism, and it's almost automatic. The person doesn't even really recognize it in themselves. The fight response is where the person gets rather aggressive and they try and dominate the discussion and get very abrupt. The flight response is where the person wants to shut the debate down, and if they can't win by shutting it down, they will actually exit the debate.
What does this have to do with the impact of religion?
Okay, so now for me, you might remember I said that belief, I believe, is a curse on humanity. I subscribe to a Jesus that's about knowing who we are.
Isn't that
the belief paradigm, I think, sits below all religious persecution. So what happens is that someone steps up and challenges the belief. Now, I would take it that you guys, being Christians, would think that the Islam people have it vastly wrong. And you would like to point that out to them. But if you do, what you'll find is that you'll eventually get to a point where you'll part ways without any conclusion. Well, at least that's what I see. It's that point in time where it's a really key point, which is really worth studying. That point where a person's motive and their responses start to escalate towards anger. It's at that real point that we really have an opportunity to understand in ourselves what is making me do that. I don't want to be angry.
Because I think we're kind of spending a lot of time on this response. Is
Sorry?
that okay? Can you wrap it up?
Sorry,
we're spending a lot of time on this response.
Oh, okay. So my point was basically watch out for that moment where your mood clocks up, and that underpins religious problems, and it's the reason why we have persecutions, because the religious person sees their belief paradigm being truly threatened, and their only response is to actually act violently in opposition. They have no other course.
Cool.
And that's why we see all through history.
I want to jump in and respond to Lucas about something that he said regarding the slaves. I want to point out that Steve and I were Christians, which means that we believe that the Old Testament stopped being applicable 2,000 years ago. So what we're talking about is a law that was handed by God, not as objective morality, but to a specific group of people during a specific time. And this is really important for like what I'm about to say, kind of regarding the topic. I think can
I just interject on that 2,000 years though?
Please do.
When Jesus came down, he said, "I did not come to abolish the old law, but to fulfill them." He never said when he fulfilled them, but he said to fulfill them.
That is true.
That could be at the apocalypse. So technically, they do still apply. Unless you can quote to me where they stopped applying.
Okay, cool. The entire book of Galatians is about why you are wrong and why it doesn't apply. In Galatians 5, it goes as far as to say that people who believe we should still be circumcised and follow the Old Testament law should go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Hopefully facetious. But if you look at the Bible as a whole, there's no possible way to justify the idea that the Old Testament law still applies. While Jesus did say that, there's a few ways that Christians historically have interpreted it. One of the main ones, I have them all written down obviously somewhere, but I don't feel like digging them up right now. But one of the main ones is that when a rabbi said to fulfill something, he meant to interpret. And Jesus' interpretation of the Old Testament law was really, really clear. He said the entire thing could be summed up by two rules, the intentions behind the entire law. Love God and love your neighbor. He believed you should, and I think that interpretation meshes really well with the Acts 15 statement that we aren't bound by Old Testament law, and the entire book of Galatians, and much of the New Testament's disagreement. However, even if I'm wrong here, grant me that most mainstream Christians do not believe we're bound by Old Testament law. So when we're talking about our belief, Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead.
My one question, and you may get tired of hearing it, because you and I are on several debate pages together,
Yeah.
and I use this one an awful lot.
Yeah.
But is Jesus God? So, like, is Jesus God's flesh form?
I believe that he is.
So then he's either fallible, or he doesn't think the same thing all the time. He just changes his mind, because that's what happened then.
What do you mean?
Well, he made the Old Testament laws, and if he actually passed those down, then those were laws that he decided on. And then when Jesus comes down, all of a sudden it's different, which he either changed his mind or he fucked up.
Similarly, I don't believe the Old Testament laws are evil, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. I believe for their time period, if the people back there were like social progressiveness level 2, and the Old Testament law was like level 14, it introduced some of the earliest understandings of social welfare for the poor, of protections for women and slaves. While minor, this was some of the most progressive and first protections for those groups in the region. And I think for the time period, it was just a radically liberal document. And I think for us to judge it by today's standards, we're like progressive level 50. I think it's kind of misleading. And I think when Jesus came, another thing that he said, he asked about an aspect of the law, and they said Moses told this, and he says, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses gave us this law. And so we get this understanding that parts of the Old Testament law, although the Bible doesn't specify which, were given because if they were more harsh, the Hebrews would have thrown them away. So God chose, I believe, what were the most stringent protections of these groups of people that he could, without stealing their free will, upending the entire discussion, and making a bunch of rules they wouldn't follow. And I think that for the time period, I think it was right. I think that had any of us been alive, we would have cheered those progressive laws on because of what they did. And I also believe that because of the Old Testament and its teachings, modern Jews today who prescribe very heavily to this document and what they believe to be the deeper meaning behind it are some of the most progressive, biggest achievers in our society. They disproportionately win all these Nobel Prizes and stuff. That's not because they are following some archaic document trying to preserve us in an ancient way of doing things. It's because they're following a document that came with the intention of expanding man's knowledge and making us a more progressive and egalitarian society. So that's what I have to say about that. I'm sorry if I went on.
I disagree, Max.
Can I just respond real quick?
Yeah, please.
I do have a question to that. All the things that happened in the Bible, per se, I mean, give or take the fucking creation, a lot of Christians are split halfway on that fucking one, so fuck it. But like biblical flood and several of the other mass genocides that occurred, do you believe that those actually happened? Because if so, then God is not. He's not opposed to wiping out an entire race of people and going, "You guys fucked up. I get to start over."
Whether it happened or not, it doesn't really do away with the problem, because obviously, if I believe something is metaphorical in the Bible, maybe then what that means is that I believe it communicates theological messages about God and his relationship with mankind. So even if the flood never happened, this is still a question that I would have to answer. So I'm just going to assume that it happened and answer it. I kind of feel like there's a bunch of hubbub from non-Christians and atheists in general about horrible ways that God kills people. And it's never made sense to me, because it seems to me that in the eyes of the infinite, whether or not we die at 90 or 4 is really like irrelevant. I think that if everyone suddenly drowned when they turned 18, we would think that was normal, and we would think it was horrible when God killed someone at 16. And I think the real issue is, I guess, that God allows people to die at all, because I think that a lot of these problems are solved by the idea of God's infiniteness. I think that if a finite amount of pain in a finite amount of time, even if for us it seems like our entire lives, is really an infinitely small amount of pain over an infinitely small amount of time in the eyes of eternity. Literally, from God's perspective, this life takes less time than the amount of time it takes a child to get a shot. And if he can justify it according to some eternal purpose and a heavenly afterlife that is ultimately for the betterment of of all. I think, and I think that it is justified, and I think that it's easy to get worked up about death when we're on this side of it.
Do you believe in hell?
I don't believe in an eternal hell. No, I'm an annihilationist, which means I believe you either go to the new earth / heaven or you die.
Well, does Steve believe in hell? Because if there's nobody in here that believes in hell, then there's no point in me bringing this up.
Steve, do you believe in hell?
It's hard for me to see the annihilationist point of view. I probably need to. Actually, I probably need to hear more about that. I had a little bit of discussion with Nick about it a while back, and but I mean, it's difficult for me to see that from the scripture.
Well, do you believe in a hell? Do you believe in a place that people go to burn in eternal hellfire forever?
Yes.
How is that a justifiable punishment for finite crimes?
Well, it's a crime against an infinite God.
How is that a justifiable punishment for for a finite crime? Even during your lifetime, at the time you die, you're no longer committing the crime. You commit the crime your entire lifetime. That's maybe 100 years, not eternity.
And then, as Max just pointed out, you're talking about a blink in time, and in that blink, you're punished infinitely.
He's right. The infinite point really turns against eternal hell believers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue that it's a difficult concept. All I'm saying is I have a hard time looking at scripture. I have a hard time rationalizing the nihilist point of view. But maybe I need to be schooled in that.
So for you, it's more like you have reasons to believe Christianity as a whole, and this is part of it. But you don't know how it's justified, so you just kind of mysterious ways the problem.
But personally, I would prefer that it be an nihilist.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's me personally. My difficulty is reading scripture and getting that interpretation.
Kagata was.
Max, I have something I'd like to say
about. Let me see if Kagata's mic works first. I told him I'd make sure. Hey, Mike, Kagata, does your mic work? I don't hear you, so if you're saying something, your mic doesn't work. Rob, what do you have to say?
I can't hear him. Can you guys hear me?
Nick! Yeah. Nick Duncan?
Yeah, that's Nick.
Are you at work right now?
No, I'm on the commute from work.
You're on the way home from work?
Yeah.
So you are driving and debating.
I am not driving. My coworker is driving.
Oh, cool. All right, so... What do you have? Have you been watching?
That doesn't fall within the texting laws, I don't think.
Yeah, they haven't had the baby on Google Hangouts made illegal yet. So.
All right, so let's let Rob say what he has to say, and then we'll let Nick say whatever he wants to say.
Okay. I'm already going to own you now.
Okay, so Max, if I look at my research, my conclusion was that Cyrus the Great corrupted Judaism with the Book of Isaiah. Now, if you look at the Book of Isaiah forward, you see this very vengeful God and quite a fearful character. I think that's very much a contrived position, and I also say in my book that the whole sky god concept occurred within the Book of Isaiah. It's where we see Yahweh positioned atop a dome-shaped world. He's set in a throne which is very much in the image of an emperor, and he sits up there governing and watching this circle disc, and with all these little grasshoppers, aka people, running around.
Hey, can I ask you a question about what you're saying right now? You said that Isaiah introduced a change in Judaism where it went from less judgmental to a more harsh kind of setting. Isn't it true that the older parts of Isaiah are the parts that are more judgmental, and the more recently written parts of Isaiah are the more open-minded, lovey-dovey kind of verses?
Yes, I agree with that. I divide Isaiah into two sections fundamentally for the simple presentation.
So
if you look at the first part of Isaiah, Max, what you see is that it's very much about the big stick being waved over the captive Jews, and then the second part is very much about here's the carrot that you'll receive if you subscribe to what you're being taught or presented in Isaiah. And we see Cyrus being presented as a savior, a messiah in that second part.
But if okay, two questions. The first one is if it was indeed a transition on Cyrus's part from a harsher a better Judaism to a more harsh kind of Judaism. There's two things we'd expect to see, which is the older documents would be less harsh, and the new ones would be more harsh. But the verses we're all talking about are from the Torah. Two of the four authors we've identified of the Torah, if the documentary hypothesis is true, are preceded Isaiah. The oldest part of Isaiah is the harshest. And so what I'm hearing you saying is it's almost as though the original Judaism, which you presumably believe was kind of unfiltered truth, was corrupted with kindness.
No. It's actually quite brutal. What happened is the Persians really, Israel as a client state, Judea, from about.
Hold on, I just remembered Nick has been waiting here for like ever, and I said I'd go to him after you spoke the first time. Nick, what's up?
Oh, my turn?
Your turn.
I wanted to say one thing to you, Max. I wanted to say one thing to Rob. Max, I came into the part of the discussion where you saying that me marginalized by the infiniteness of eternity. Is that correct?
That is correct. And by the way, I am loving the close-up of your nose. I'm weirdly aroused.
As always. Anyways, I was just wondering, would you say that this marginalizes Jesus' suffering on the cross and basically all the other stuff that I could kind of be like, gotcha with that, but that would be the main one. That Jesus said nothing. I'm not done. God would have not done anything, really any sort of effort whatsoever to save us from our sin if we're going to marginalize it based on the temporal duration. And so I was also going to retort to Rob basically the exact same way that you did. You look at documentary hypothesis, and even if and this it's only a possibility, really, I definitely think that the earliest antiquatal Judaism was polytheistic, but even if it was, they still regarded Yahweh as a deity superior to the others long before the time of Isaiah.
The Old Testament from beginning to end is flagrantly monotheistic, especially the oldest parts. But I want to respond real fast.
Where in Isaiah is there something like Noah's flood as a way of judging the entire human race? That argue that Isaiah it gets more.
Okay, I don't know what he's.
Can anybody else hear him? I can't
hear him, so I'm just going to.
I couldn't hear it.
The problem with Jesus and trivializing his sacrifice is twofold. One, when someone makes a sacrifice for you and you trivialize it, even if you're justified, you're a butthole. Okay. Two, there are two senses in which human suffering is finite. The first is time, and the second is amount. And I kind of referenced both of those things earlier. But Jesus, while his time suffering was finite, his drop from infinite God to finite human to death was an infinite drop. So, like, mathematic-wise, we are comparing infinitely large for an infinitely small amount of time to infinitely small for an infinitely small amount of time. I don't think that Jesus' stuff is trivialized if you keep in mind our belief that he was God.
Okay, well,
Get that nose out of my face.
The first one didn't seem like a fully developed thought. I don't know how seriously you wanted me to respond to it, because it was just like kind of a your whole thing, which is kind of funny. But I think the meteor point that you just offered is kind of one, Jesus didn't suffer that bad, and you can look at Josephus and Antiquities, and many crucified Jews got it a lot worse than Jesus did. And Jesus wasn't ripped apart piece by piece in front of his family, for example. That's just one way of which he didn't get the worst possible physical torment. Now this idea that
So mental note: if I take a bullet for Nick, he's going to complain that the bullet wasn't in a more painful place. But I would argue that
no,
human.
I'm not complaining. I'm pointing out that you're wrong. If
Okay,
someone
let me
I had it in the most painful place, I would correct them.
But for an infinite God to lower himself to a human, even a
I
human.
was going to respond to that, but you interrupted me.
I'm going to point to. There's some quote: better to be a man satisfied than a pig dissatisfied, or rather, better be a man dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied.
I get your point.
Shut up.
Right.
Talking.
I get it.
Did he or did he not rise again in 3 days?
Oh, he rose again.
Well, then he did not suffer a finite death. He rose again.
Hey, Nick, shut up. It's Lucas's turn. You've talked like 3 times in a row.
You interrupted me to reiterate your point when I was about to respond to it, and then you started to assert it like, no, you have to say this. So, my turn?
Your turn.
Okay, now this concept of God going to man and that being a sacrifice itself. First, I want to point out that this transition of it being a sacrifice.
You're breaking up, Nick.
We completely lost.
Nick, we can't understand you.
Okay, Lucas is gonna go because you're breaking up.
He still has.
Oh wait,
Okay, Lucas, go ahead.
I have a sacrifice now.
Okay, that's really annoying me, so I am going to mute him so that we don't get any feedback until he gets his poop together. And in the meantime, Lucas.
So, we already covered this point, but I'm going to cover it again because there was riffraff in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Did he rise again 3 days after he died?
Yes.
And he now lives eternally in La La Land with magical sky fairies everywhere.
He is God. So.
So he lives in magical La La Land with sky fairies everywhere.
Much like me, he lives with himself.
But he is eternal. So your point about it being he went from infinite to finite, he never really did that. If he directly from infinite into life, which is how the Bible portrays it, then he died, and 3 days later, that means he was inconvenienced with not existing for 3 days. Okay,
but
I slept after an Adderall.
That 3-day drop was a drop from infinite to finite, which is an infinite drop. Because
so his father no longer existed while he was here.
Well, he did, but Jesus was
then there was nothing. There was no suffering.
Well, Jesus was the manifestation of God that was cut off so that God could experience. Like Jesus was finite from an infinite being. That's a big deal. That's a huge drop. And like while his infiniteness still existed, it was cut off from him, and he lived a life as a finite guy. That's an infinite drop. And anyways, I kind of feel like Christian theology isn't really hugely dependent on how severe we think Jesus' particular thing was, although I do think being crucified is awful, even if you rise again 3 days later, especially if you were already in La La Land with the fairies or whatever as you put it. Like, he stepped down from La La Land, left the fairies behind, and became a human, which was the worst back then. It's not super great now, but it was the worst back then. And then he was crucified by the people who created him. That's a huge drop. I want to be an ant for 33 years.
You just admit that we created God.
No, I'm sorry. God created us. If I said that, it was a misspeaking.
Because you just said that he came down to the people who created him, which would be completely in agreement with the point of view on this,
that was
which would end it.
Can I interrupt you to tell you a story?
Go ahead. I love story time.
One time, I was leading a Bible study for a bunch of children, and I had a misspeaking not unlike that one, in which I accidentally convinced them all that Islam was the true religion. And let me tell you,
how old was everybody? Because that makes a difference.
They were young. I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember. At the camp I worked at, they ranged from 8 to 14 typically, so somewhere in that time range. But I remember my boss was kind of frowned a little bit upon the fact that I had told everyone, and the counselors were confused too because I've been teaching them about the Bible and stuff. So it was really funny, and the reactions were really funny.
So
Wish I could
I stepped into this late, and there's no fucking like I don't know banner on this thing telling me anything. What is the actual core topic that we're all here to discuss? In the first place?
The topic is that Aaron Spirax Rowe and Steve Throckmorton were going to have a debate, but then Aaron bailed at the last second, and here we all are, not really doing anything in particular.
So, but what was their original topic?
Their original topic was going to be one that we were going to save for them. Steve particularly wants to save it, but the topic was going to be whether Christian values, Steve came up with this topic, are better for mankind as a whole than atheist values, which I'm not sure what that is, but I'm hoping it would be defined in the debate.
Hey, Max, can you hear me?
Well,
can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, good, finally.
Yeah, I
Just
know.
making sure. Go on.
The best part of this discussion was listening. Do you have anything you want to say that you were trying to say while your mic wasn't working?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that I'm in the middle of it. I mean, I don't think that... wait, can you remind me of what the topic was again?
I think you were specifically interested in the infinite discussion about death and whether God killing people was a big deal.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you. That was all I was doing.
Oh, cool.
I would like to go ahead and step out on the limb of what this original debate was supposed to be about, because I don't even know how we got to where we are now. I wasn't here for a majority of that.
The original debate, we abandoned it because Steve wanted to save it for Aaron. He really wants to keep his arguments in his back pocket. So,
well, I'd like to go ahead and state what the so-called atheist values are.
Please do.
I happen to be an atheist, and as far as I know, we don't really have a handbook other than, I don't know, whatever country you reside in, go ahead, pick up your local legal handbook on all the walls that exist there, and that's pretty much atheist values.
So what you're saying is, atheists are amoral monsters whose only moral guidance are the laws and the punishments that come with them?
Sure, if that's what you took from what I just said, fine.
That was a joke.
but a more accurate way of putting it is that a majority of us atheists hold a thing that go, well, the laws exist as laws because it was agreed upon at a time when the society was forming the laws, and still get agreed upon today. If I wanted to oppose any law that currently exists, I could raise a petition or some kind of legal injunction and get it ratified and all that. I don't have the time, nor do I give a shit about any law in particular enough to do it, but I could. And it's a social construct because we are social animals. You can try to deny that all you want, but you can say we're social beings if you don't like being associated with animals. Whatever, I'm not having the evolution debate. That happened 2 nights ago and it was miserable. Yeah, I would say that we as atheists don't really have a construct per se that pertains outside of social needs.
Well, even more.
Well, I think you do have a construct, and I think it's very obvious. I think you do have a construct, and I think it's very obvious what it is if you pay attention to the broader picture or the bigger picture. And I think that construct is this. You spoke about law as being one of the guidelines, and law basically comes from common law. Common law is common understanding. Common understanding you could equate to wisdom. Now, wisdom is something that we seem to have. We don't seem to acquire it. And if you look at Plato, he speaks about 4 characteristics that sit with the good philosopher or the good true person. They are temperance, justice. They are temperance, justice, courage, and wisdom.
Where are these derived from, these values? Why are they objectively...
I can explain.
Okay.
I can explain. Yeah.
I don't like the word. I don't like the use of the word objective. Only in the fact that everything objective, you're still viewing through a subjective lens. Your eye is a subjective lens. So
you're sounding very chaotic.
Is a subjective lens.
Is common law something that you would call subjective or objective?
Subjective, agreed upon widely, subjective, but still subjective.
No, it's objective because it's common law. It's held in common. There's an agreement reached between a group of people. Otherwise, it doesn't make it into law. It can't be subjective. because otherwise you would have to have multiple common laws.
That's not
We
what
only
subjective means.
one
Everyone
common
can have the same common law, and it can still be subjective. Subjective
But
means.
there's only one law, Max. There's only one law.
Can you prove that's true?
Yeah. Pardon?
Can you
No,
prove that is true?
you're thinking in the terms of each law being a separate element, but each law is its own essence and it's commonly agreed upon. That also applies to wisdom. When you see true wisdom, it's held in common.
But
People
but
look at
objective
that wisdom and they say, I agree with that wisdom, so that's a
objective means
common.
if everyone died, it would still be true. Like subjective, everyone can agree, and it can still be subjective, and it can be objective in the sense that it is objectively adhering to the standard we've subjectively chosen. But like objective is a big claim, and it happens to be one that I believe. But I don't necessarily think that you can say that I don't know. I think that you're making a bunch of claims that aren't necessarily provable. Does that make
And
sense?
I would have to say on your because you said you believe in objectivity, and I'm guessing that your objectivity that you believe in is the God's word is moral and law and true and all that other bullshit, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Because
Because you just said you believe in. You just said you
asking
believe
about
in
my arguments for the Old Testament law, or are you asking about?
No, I'm asking in general about God.
Okay. Ethically,
You said you believe in objectivity, and in a religious debate, that would lead me to believe you're arguing, since you're Christian, on the side of that God's morals are objectively moral, whereas.
sort of. I don't adhere to divine command theory, which is the belief that something is good because God says it is good. I believe that there are objective moral values, and I'm going to use love as an example. I think love is an objectively good thing. And I think, objective in a fabric of the universe, if everyone was dead, including God, love would still be good. And I think that we construct, and I think that God has constructed, because he knows more about it than we do, rules that are subjective that protect these objective values to greater or lesser success. Does that make sense? My belief in ethics is one that I could believe even if I was an atheist. It would just be weird.
Well, Max, I'll offer you an explanation of. So your explanation would be that all the goodness and all of the wisdom and everything comes from God. I'm going to give you an alternative explanation.
That wouldn't be my explanation.
Hey? Okay, well, all right, you can qualify it in a minute, but I'll just give you my explanation, then perhaps if you counter that, your response there. So what I'd say to you is that, and this goes back to that herd concept, where we act as a herd, I think that you'll find that everything that's related to God is founded on authentic, and the key word here is authentic, selflessness and meditation. Those two components sit below all virtue, all goodness, or common law. They're all founded on authentic selflessness and meditation.
So what you have said is kind of similar to what I have said, in that you have raised up things that you believe to be subjective values and declared them to be subjective values, which is fine. I don't agree that those are, I don't believe that those. I think that there are more. I would point to love as an example, and I'm not sure how to. Defining selflessness in an objective sense feels kind of.
Right. So let's talk about love, Max.
Can I hop in here right quick? I haven't spoken in a while.
You're back.
I was actually been talking for a while, and I didn't realize my mic was muted. I kept on getting frustrated. Right when they let me say it, then I realized my mic was muted.
You, Charles. Okay, I muted you because your phone stopped working, and you sounded like a robot who could only speak every 5 seconds. So every time someone else started to speak, you'd be like, "Bap." And I was like, yeah, that's not. That's not.
It's just dark here to see me. My camera's working. It's just too dark. But anyway, first I want to point out some distinction here. You guys seem to have the wrong definition of subjective and objective.
Max, before we go down that road, could we just finish the love connection?
Sure. I was just going to say that I think that the values you've identified are not necessally whole.
Okay. So I just want to. I want to draw a connection to.
The very idea of objective.
I want to.
Where did Nick go? Every time he tries to speak, he vanishes. Hang on, Lucas. Lucas, you go.
Hey,
Rob,
Max,
I love you. I love you, but
you allow- can I finish the point? Can I
Okay,
finish
finish
the
the
point?
point, but do it quickly.
It is quickly. So what I said was the foundation of all good is authentic selflessness and meditation. Now, love is only experienced, true love, when we're authentically selfless and not thinking about ourselves. It doesn't belong to, the context of the mind and ourself. That's love.
Okay.
Authentic. Yeah.
Lucas, what do you think of my definition of morality, and how does it fit into what response you were going to make to me earlier?
As far as love is concerned, because that seems to be the one everybody's interested in harping on. Love, as with many other emotions, are you talking about emotional love, or are you talking about some other type of love?
See, that's the thing. Is obviously it has an emotional, chemical aspect. It's tough to say whether or not that's all of it, but I don't particularly. I mean, talking about the nature of love, it was just an example. But I mean, if you could use it as an example too.
Well, then I'll use it as an example as well, because that's the example we're writing on. I don't really have another one from you yet. With it being a chemical reaction, and let's go ahead and put it on its most simplistic use forms, which is relationships, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean
that's what
not
I would
necessarily
the most simplistic, and all that is that's what I would put it on when you actually have the notion of what love is. I mean, sure, you love your parents, but you don't really know why you love.
I love my family. I love my friends. I think you can love things outside of a romantic.
And that is true. And I would say that for the most part in those, you don't really know why you would use the word love, but you do anyway. I would say that when it's the chemical reaction love, it's very much subjective. It's why you could find a girl very attractive, or a guy. I don't fucking know what sexuality you are. Oh, you could find a guy very attractive, and I could find them very unattractive and go, I don't know why the fuck you chose them. And you know what? That's very subjective. You can say that that I should love them objectively, but no, I don't love them. They have not earned a spot of respect. Which, if you're going on respect as if you're using love as respect, we can go on the topic of respect, but we should all agree on what fucking term we're going to use for that. But yeah, should we respect everybody to a certain point? Those who have earned it, yes, and even that is subjective. Whether or not they've earned your respect is very subjective. So you can say that it's objective to give everybody respect, but okay. Well, I'll finish my point. But you have to earn it subjectively.
Our moderator is gone. I just want to touch on a point that Rob made earlier, that he said that love is not selfish. I would argue the opposite, that love is actually selfish.
Not true love, mate.
What's that?
Not true love.
Oh, well, I disagree, because I think that, think about it this way, Max has a girlfriend, exactly, right? I mean, that's probably something you all know about him, but he has a girlfriend, so he
no point in assigning genders to it, mate.
What's that?
Said
well,
no
yeah, I'm
point
just using this as an example. I mean, so okay. Anyway, he has a girlfriend, right? So think about it this way: there is somebody out there who is better for that girl than him, but he still loves her and he still wants to be with her.
Yes.
I mean, objectively, no matter who you are, there's always going to be someone better.
Can I say something?
Can I throw the tail end of my point to Max? Then you can say something.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So before you dropped out, I was about to say that love, in pretty much any kind of sense, if you're going to use it as respect or you're going to use it as a romantic interest, is very much subjective. In the way that if you're going to give somebody respect, first of all, respect isn't an entitlement; it's earned. And if you're going to earn the respect, you have to earn it through somebody's subjective filter. Therefore, making it very subjective.
Oh yeah, I agree that you experience it in a subjective sense, but when you love somebody, it is objectively good. Love is always good. That's my point.
Yeah, I agree.
Hitler loved Eva Braun to the point where he was willing to exterminate thousands or millions and millions of people. So is that a good thing that he loved her that much that he was going to kill everybody on the planet? I think it was Eva Braun was his girlfriend that he was found in the bunker next to.
That is correct.
I would say a few things. I think the problem there was that he wasn't expressing enough love for the Jews. I also think that the love itself, if he did love this girl, I don't know much about his romances. Kagata probably does because he's Kagata. But
Jerry has, for Max is talking about agape love. That's a very that Christian sense of love is very different than the sort of romantic love that we might have for a certain individual, like Hitler had for Eva Braun. Just to
exactly.
But I also feel like if I love someone and then they ask me to kill a bunch of people and I do, killing a bunch of people was bad, but the love wasn't bad. The love was good. The emotion itself was good.
Is it objectively bad, or is it subjectively bad?
I think it is objectively bad. I think that he's violating. Oh no, I'm not claiming it. I'm explaining my beliefs about morality. I don't know. I can't prove it. I might be wrong. I'm probably wrong on something. Everyone is.
Max, Steve wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was only going to say I think we're arguing in some sense. I think we're arguing semantics when we talk about love, because I think there's different kinds of love. And earlier, while you were offline, Max, we were talking. Somebody said that love can be self-centered. Somebody said it wasn't self-centered; it was selfless. And somebody else said no, it can be self-centered. And I think it depends on what type of love you're talking about. If you're talking about an eros type of love or a sexual type of love, that can definitely be self-centered. If you're talking about agape, that the very definition of it is not self-centered or other-centered love, because it sacrifices your good for somebody else's good. So it depends on what kind of love you're talking about, I think.
For me, I'm talking about the love of the herd and the survival instinct that I spoke about earlier. It's like a shoal of fish, right? If you imagine a shoal of fish, their survival strategy is to stay together, and what that requires of the members of the herd is that they keep a very close eye on their neighbour and they don't break ranks. If they break ranks and don't respect their neighbour's position, then the survival strategy will fail and falter. So when I talk about authentic love, I'm talking about love of the herd before the self. It's that love thy neighbour concept. And the other thing that I'll throw into the discussion is, consider this. How different is a tear of joy, that actual experience, and I would argue that it has no self in that experience. And it's held in common. It's very much a objective experience, that tear, that genuine, authentic tear of joy. And sorrow too. I mean, they're the same source. That's my $2 worth, guys. Hello, anybody home?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
So I guess I'm arguing for love being true love, and this is really true love. You know, not a love that's about the self and getting something out of the self.
Who gets to define what true love is?
Well, I think there is such a thing as true love, and it's about caring for the herd.
It wasn't a question of whether or not it exists. His question was who gets to choose the definition.
Well, so I think it could be
just like saying, what's a true Christian? I mean, I think you would argue that, like I brought up earlier, the Westboro Baptist Church or the Ku Klux Klan, those aren't true Christians, right?
No.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
So are we in a no true fallacy?
They call themselves Christians. Why are they right? And
because they're not following a biblical model.
But by their definition, they are. By their herd mentality, their splinter herd, they are doing exactly as the Bible commands.
But I think you'll find that the leader was a dominant force there, and he corrupted the whole religious paradigm to suit himself. And I think I'm hearing that he had some underlying agendas and issues of a personal nature himself. So he looks like a very corrupted force. So it's more a hierarchical.
So in that case, would you not put the Pope on the same pedestal of dominator, fucking owner?
Absolutely. Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
Well,
Absolutely.
then Catholics are no longer true Christians because they're out, and any other church that has a central
I
force
agree
is
with
they're
Rob
out.
believes
I
all
agree
of
with that.
us are misled. He believes that that all of our gospels are corrupted, were invented by the Romans. His beliefs
Correct.
about
No, I know that, mate. I don't believe stuff. I do my research.
okay, he knows it.
Thank you.
So then we're in a no true Scotsman fallacy because apparently with that in mind, nobody's a Christian. Nobody possibly could be. You'd have to literally live homeless, and you'd have to continually work and give everything you have to the poor, always for the rest of your life, to be one.
No. The thing that I'd suggest is you read the Gospel of Thomas and actually take the time to understand what the real Jesus was saying. You'll find it's very much about just being a stand-up citizen, just being a good person, loving your neighbour. Don't prejudge anyone by, take the slither out of your eye. I mean, 61 of those sayings were pinched by the Romans and put into the New Testament. So Jesus has got a lot of brilliant. He's probably one of the finest philosophers ever going. So,
Well, so was Gandhi.
but you got to read it.
Aristotle.
Sorry.
And lots of people throughout history have said great things. I don't discount that they did. But to take Jesus as a savior, first of all, we would need to put him on some credibility ground, prove one of his miracles, for instance.
The miracles are nonsense. They were made up by the Romans.
Well, that's the only thing that gives him really credibility, other than some person back in a historical point at time said this one thing, at which point it doesn't matter who said it.
No, I disagree with you, mate, because you would have to read the Gospel of Thomas and assess that as a philosophical document.
You
and
should
my
keep
premise,
in mind when you
my
read
premises, my premises is it's a very solid philosophy.
it. You should
So
keep in
if
mind when you read it.
Aristotle had said the same things, and Jesus had never come to be, you would take those. You would still say that those are great and those are godlike and those are this and that. Based on the fact that Jesus no longer said them, because at that point it doesn't matter.
No, what I'd say is, and I do this in the book, what I say is I draw a connection where I say that Plato and Jesus are on the same page. They're talking the same language. But I actually go one step further. There's a piece by Plato, it's called Meno. It's interestingly named, Meno. I wonder if he actually had a code in that, know me sort of thing. But in Meno, the conclusion is that virtue cannot be taught. When you come forward and you read the Gospel of Thomas, it cannot be taught. So that says basically.
Can I just? How do you feel about the fact? Can I ask you a question, Rob?
Hang on, Max. 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah, you can lead the horse to water. But Plato's conclusion was that you couldn't get that horse to drink, and the example he gave was he gave some famous good people of his day, and he said if it was true that you could actually teach virtue, then their sons wouldn't be such arseholes as they are. And I think I know in my life experience, virtue is it's very difficult to teach. But I think if you have a look at the Gospel of Thomas, the sense I got there is that this Jesus character was actually able to not only give a solid philosophy, he was actually able to, through his example, I guess, or whatever, but he was actually able to get people to drink, because in Josephus, what we see is that Jesus is written up as a very popular character. And we have those 7 churches up in Asia Minor. So he must have grabbed some popularity, I think, and I think that's due to just something special about the guy. So I see him as one step higher up the ladder than Plato.
I just want to remind everyone that the Gospel of Thomas is believed by most scholars to be verifiably forged, largely because its author, Judas Didymus Thomas, was a bunch of characters wrapped up into one that can't be proven to exist in that form. And I also want to point out that people like Rob especially will say things like that these sayings some of them were taken from the Gospel of Thomas and some were excluded, and he believes all of those are legitimate sayings of Jesus. But most scholars believe that Thomas borrowed it from another source, which the other Gospels also borrowed from. There's not like There's
What's
no
that?
scholarly consensus and no evidence for Rob's elevation of the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah. What's the other source, Max?
Huh?
What's the other source that they were borrowed from?
I don't know. It might be. I don't really remember which of the letters was assigned to it. All of the theoretical sources we have letters assigned to them, but we do know that there are pre-sources that some of the Gospels borrowed from that they did not.
Yeah, you'll have to bring them to bear because I couldn't find any.
Okay. I'll look it up by our next debate. We know we're going to be in a debate together.
So what I'm saying is that there is no precedent, Max.
Hey, Johnny. Welcome, by the way. Why is it that you have this nice setup, but whenever you're on my show, you're on like a phone? He spent like an hour putting up a green screen. In any case,
He's got himself muted at the moment.
I just hopped in real quick. I saw you tagged me and Rob Beasley.
Yeah, I was lost. I was a lost sheep. But hey, Lucas, did you have something that you were saying to me earlier that got swept under the rug?
What topic particularly? Because we covered about.
Man, I don't know. We kind of bounced around a lot.
Yeah, we covered about 3 topics since you and I last had a interim.
Huh. Scott, you've been overridden a lot. What do you have to say about stuff? Anything? There's no planning in this particular discussion. Whoever's in charge should never be an admin of a debate group, that's for sure.
Yeah, for the most part, I've been moving around and only hearing part of it, so I'm good right now.
Cool. So,
were you guys just discussing Gospel of Thomas and Gospels and Q-Source and stuff like that?
We were.
Cool.
But I feel like we've been going for like an hour and a half, so do you guys just want to tune it off?
It's up to each person at their own discretion. I'm good to go as long as anybody else is good to go.
All right. Well, I think we're going to shut it off, and we can keep talking afterwards or whatever. Hey, thanks for tuning in for our least prepared debate ever.
You're not avoiding a discussion on the Gospel of Thomas, are you?
I'm not, but I realized once we started the discussion that I would prefer to look up the exact gospel that he's believed to have copied from, so that we can have this discussion again, Rob. But I do promise.
Well, I'm quite happy at any point to examine all the 114 sayings and show how they're noble.
I promise you, next month we will have a debate on this channel over whether or not the Gospel of Thomas is forged. I promise. It's not going to go under the rug. It's going to happen. Okay?
Next time, can we have a debate with a centralized topic? That would be amazing.
Oh, yeah. Ordinarily we do. Aaron Spirix bailed on our primary debate tonight, so we just kind of made it up. And that's why I tagged everyone, because I wanted to make something, because it was like not a lot of water.
Max,
I'm turning off the broadcast. Let's talk after that. Hang on. Subscribe and die. Bye.